Beyond the golden sands of the Sahara, past the dunes that seemed to stretch forever, another world was taking shape. This was East Africa, a region where oceans, rivers, mountains, and valleys created crossroads of people and power. If North Africa looked to the Mediterranean, East Africa looked both to the heart of the continent and across the Indian Ocean, linking Africa with Arabia, Persia, India, and even China. East Africa was never isolated. It was global long before globalization had a name. Here, empires rose, city-states thrived, and cultures blended into something uniquely African, yet connected to the wider world. Let's step into that world. We begin with the Kingdom of Aksum, in today's Ethiopia and Eritrea. Imagine towering stone monuments, obelisks carved from single pieces of rock, pointing proudly into the sky. These weren't just decorations. They were symbols of power, like skyscrapers are today, proclaiming, "This is a city that matters." Aksum was one of the greatest empires of its time. It controlled trade routes across the Red Sea, linking Africa to Arabia and the wider world. Ships from Aksum sailed as far as India, carrying ivory, gold, and exotic animals. In return, they brought back spices, cloth, and ideas. And here's something remarkable: while much of the ancient world clung to old religions, Aksum became one of the very first empires in the world to officially adopt Christianity, long before most of Europe. This left a lasting legacy, seen today in Ethiopia's rock-hewn churches, carved straight into the earth, still standing after more than 1,000 years. But Aksum was not the only story of East Africa. To the south, new powers were growing, not on mountains, but along the coast. Picture the East African coast: warm breezes, turquoise waters, and bustling harbors filled with sails. This was the world of the Swahili city-states, a string of vibrant trading ports stretching from Somalia to Mozambique. Cities like Kilwa, Mombasa, and Zanzibar became jewels of the Indian Ocean trade. Their streets echoed with voices in Swahili, a language born from the blending of African Bantu tongues with Arabic, Persian, and even Indian influences. It was the ultimate cultural fusion, and you can still hear it spoken widely today. What made these cities thrive? Trade. Gold from the interior, ivory from elephants, spices from distant lands, and even enslaved people, all passed through Swahili hands. In return, they received fine silks, porcelain, and beads. Chinese ships once anchored in these harbors, bringing gifts from emperors thousands of miles away. Think of the Swahili city-states as the New Yorks and Dubais of their day, places where cultures collided and wealth was measured in gold and spices. Moving inland, we find the Kingdom of Buganda, around the shores of Lake Victoria. Buganda's power came not from oceans but from fertile land and water. Farmers grew bananas and millet, feeding a growing population, while warriors protected the kingdom and expanded its influence. The Kabaka, or king, wasn't just a ruler. He was the center of political, spiritual, and cultural life. Buganda's organization, its systems of chiefs, courts, and armies, was so sophisticated that when Europeans finally arrived centuries later, they were stunned to find a state as complex as many in Europe. Buganda showed that great African civilizations weren't only about pyramids or coastal trade, they were also about political brilliance and strong institutions deep in the continent. Remember Nubia and Kush from the north? Their influence did not simply vanish. Instead, their cultural and political traditions spread southward and eastward. In places like Makuria, a Christian Nubian kingdom in what is now Sudan, rulers blended African traditions with Christianity and Arab influences. For centuries, these kingdoms resisted invasions, negotiating peace when war wasn't possible, and protecting their people in one of Africa's most difficult crossroads. These were not forgotten backwaters, they were heirs to ancient power, carrying forward traditions from the time of the pharaohs into the medieval age. While Aksum declined, Ethiopia remained a beacon. For centuries, it stood as one of the few places in Africa that maintained independence and cultural continuity. Its kings claimed descent from the biblical King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, giving their rule divine legitimacy. But Ethiopia's greatness wasn't just in stories. It was in stone. Imagine churches carved downward into the rock, entire sanctuaries hidden beneath the earth, invisible from above. Pilgrims still walk into these spaces today, chanting prayers that echo across centuries. Ethiopia's faith became its shield. Surrounded by Muslim sultanates and later threatened by European colonial ambitions, Ethiopia survived. It became a symbol of African resilience, proof that Africa could withstand the storm of foreign powers. In Somalia and the Horn of Africa, powerful Islamic sultanates like Adal and Ifat rose, commanding trade routes and spreading Islam across the region. These weren't small kingdoms, they were regional powers, sometimes clashing with Ethiopia, sometimes trading with Arabia and beyond. The city of Mogadishu, even centuries ago, was already famous across the Indian Ocean as a place of wealth and culture. In fact, Chinese explorers described it as one of the richest cities they had ever seen. So, East Africa wasn't just a footnote in history. It was a hub of trade, faith, and culture. From the mighty Aksumite obelisks to the bustling Swahili ports, from the fertile lands of Buganda to the rock-carved churches of Ethiopia, East Africa stood as proof that African civilizations were sophisticated, diverse, and deeply connected to the wider world. But here's the twist: while East Africa looked outward across the seas, another region of Africa was writing its story in gold, salt, and empire. A place where deserts turned into highways of wealth, and kings commanded riches that dazzled even Europe. That story begins in West Africa.